19th century, immigration into the United States was basically open. You just showed up. So the Chinese exclusion law is one of the first really comprehensively restrictive laws. And it's also the first and only time in the entire history of the United States that a group is singled out by name, Chinese, by name, as being undesirable.
The fear of invasion brought tensions to the border, while across the U.S., a different movement was gaining strength. The eugenics movement, based on junk science, aimed to create a genetically and morally superior population. That meant stricter controls on immigration, only allowing those deemed fit to enter. U.S. health officials were tasked with weeding out immigrants they thought were unfit or disease carriers. They funded a new disinfection plant at the border in 1916. In this facility, every immigrant considered a second-class citizen had to strip naked. An inspector would check each person's body, including private parts, for lice. If they found lice, immigrants would have to shave their head and body hair and bathe in a mix of kerosene and vinegar. In 1917 alone, over 100,000 Mexicans were deloused at the border. That same year, an immigration law made border procedures even more rigid. Immigrants at all points of entry needed to have a passport, take a literacy test, and many would have to pay an $8 head tax. And later that year, the U.S. Public Health Service laid down instructions for border agents about who should be kept out of the country.
If you go back past my mother, back to her mother, who was Danish, and her father, who was a Ho-Chunk Winnebago, he had been, and his father, before that, had gone through the Carlisle Indian School. And what happened was, sort of when all the trouble with the Indians subsided in the late 1800s, they went out and collected tons of Indian children from the Great Plains, from all the tribes, and brought them to Carlisle, and they were going to, as they said, quote, educate the Indian out of them.
What was the purpose of the boarding schools? Basically, it was the United States trying to deal with the Indian problem. Well, let's educate, culturate them through education. Kill the Indian, save the man. And how do you kill the Indian? You kill his spirit. Take away the language, take away the ceremonies, take away their traditions. There was a lot of Native children that were undocumented that disappeared. And the city only acknowledged through records maybe less than 10. But through our research now, they've been able to identify over 150.
Just as the boarding school era started fading, another assimilation project took shape: adoption. The main goal of this pilot project was to stimulate the adoption of American Indian children to primarily non-Indian adoptive homes. They claimed it was to promote the adoption of the forgotten child, but it was essentially a continuation of the boarding school assimilation tactics. And the strategy came with a financial advantage for the government too. Adoption was cheaper than running boarding schools.
What do we do? These high school students feel dumped on. They're protesting a new Arizona law that would cut the Tucson School District's budget by $36 million a year if the district doesn't stop the way it's allegedly teaching its Mexican American Studies class.
Have courses that are designed primarily for students of a particular ethnicity or that arouse resentment against other ethnicities. That's the essence of it.
The law also says ethnic studies classes cannot advocate ethnic solidarity or teach the overthrow of the U.S. government.
These are rife in American history, but the ethnicities happen to be Polish, Irish, Italian. They happen to be white, European, Western, and Eastern European identities that are the basis of ethnic identity and what constitutes American history. If there was an integration of Chicana studies, of African American studies, of Latina studies, of gay and lesbian studies into the broader curriculum, there would be no need to have these subgroupings and these subcultural attention paid to these particular formations.
Certain discussions about race or gender in the classroom could soon be illegal. Senate Bill 2022 passed the Senate last week. The House expected to take it up this week. But as KVU's Jenny Lee reports, one teachers group is fighting it because they say it would jeopardize how social studies is taught.
Teachers would not be allowed to talk about controversial issues, historical or current. I want my kids right now talking about cultural issues, especially right now what's going on in the Asian community. I want them to understand that it's not just us, right? There's other people who are experiencing this.
Stories matter. Many stories matter. Stories have been used to dispossess and to malign, but stories can also be used to empower and to humanize. Stories can break the dignity of a people, but stories can also repair that broken dignity.